I really was going to start with kind of understanding the core concepts of UDL and do the quick UDL introduction. And then the second half was looking, kind of going through a timeline of a lesson, kind of looking at the arc of a lesson and ways that you could introduce UDL and integrate UDL throughout a lesson, and look at both kind of in-person and remote versions of that. So of that, is there anything that sounds most appealing? Are there any goals that you're coming to this with that are outside of that we could jump on?
You want us to say them, put them in the chat?
You can put them in the chat. You can say them out loud, Robin. You know, there's multiple means here.
Remote. And yeah, I'd love to think more about UDL principles and remote. I find it rather challenging at the moment. Okay. So.
Yeah, and there are huge challenges, one of which being things that we don't have any control over.
But the other two may have a very different preference. So I'm just one of three.
I mean, I think in my case, it's, you know, a little bit of remote and then simultaneously when I'm doing the blended model.
Yeah, that's why I kept the in-person stuff in there, because people are doing, you know, blended models. They're doing all sorts of, you know, everybody's doing something different, and everything's going to be relevant in different ways in different contexts.
What about you, Em?
I am good with those two goals. I think one of the things that I think a lot about is planning, and I am because I feel like I'm entering this at fairly beginner level. I know that it's a lot of forward, like you're putting your plan a whole lot of time at the initial stages that will save time later, but it's still, I find it challenging because of our current circumstances.
Yeah.
But I'm, in general, would love to talk more about, like, how do you approach planning and organization? And
great. So I think that what I'll do to do a quick intro version is hit on some of the core concepts, go through the design process. That'll probably take 15 minutes because we're going to do the short version, and then we'll jump into examples. Does that sound good?
That's great.
Okay. Yep. I put links to the home base and to the slides in the doc, in the chat rather. The home base has some resources in it, especially the UDL guidelines will be a good resource when we get there. But we aren't going to use that home base for brainstorming as much as we might have if we had a larger group.
Okay. That's totally new to me, home base.
Yeah, so this is something we do a lot in these online facilitation, is have a Google Doc that has all of the links and resources in a home base, so it's in one place. And then if we have a large group, we will do a lot of silent brainstorming in there. So everybody can get their ideas out. You can see other people's ideas, you can respond to other people's ideas. And it's a great tool for, certainly for high school, but even for some elementary and middle context for learners to just share. So you're getting, you know, more, even more, you're getting more of a kind of turn and talk type of interaction than you would be able to if everybody on Zoom speaks, because, you know, if you've got 10 people on Zoom.
It's like Nearpod and Jamboard. Is it similar to Nearpod and Jamboard?
I think the way that people are using those, yeah, is similar. I mean, it's just a Google Doc, so, you know, you can do anything you want with it. But if you take, I'll show you later if you want how we use those. So UDL is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize barriers. So those three bolded items are kind of what we're going to spell out, right? What do we mean by setting clear goals, anticipating barriers, designing to minimize those barriers? Rachel, if you've seen anything about UDL, you may have seen these UDL guidelines, colorful guidelines. I put this slide in there because to say, don't worry about that now, we'll come back to it later. UDL is very much a way of looking at design and proactively designing, as Emily was saying. And the guidelines are one of the tools to do that, but they're not the place to start. The guidelines are based on the 3 networks of the brain that are primarily involved in learning: the affective network, which controls emotion; the representation, the recognition network, which controls your senses and how you process information; and then the strategic network, which controls what you do and how you organize yourself to get things done. So kind of core for each of those networks and each of the principles that come out of them: multiple means of engagement. How will students engage with learning? How do we support them to become purposeful and motivated? Multiple means of representation. How will students perceive new information and comprehend it, make sense of it? And how do we support them to become more resourceful and knowledgeable? And multiple means of action and expression. How do we support students to be strategic and goal-directed? How will they act on their understanding? So out of those 3 brain networks come these 3 columns and the specific guidelines or recommendations under each of those columns. So the first big UDL core concept is that variability is the norm. Almost nobody disagrees with this. You come into a classroom, you've got 30 kids, you have 30 different learners, and the next day, or in English class, they're one way, in math class, they're another way. So it's not even that they're the same all the time. They're constantly changing and evolving over short periods of time and long periods of time. So it moves away from the idea that we're going to teach to the middle of the class. There's a kind of an average that we're going to teach to, and then we're going to differentiate from there. We use this lasagna metaphor. You're excited to throw a dinner party, and you're inviting all these people over. You make an excellent lasagna, and everybody's going to love it. However, when people show up, this is my family several years ago. Kylie and John are vegan. My mom can't eat red meat. Dina's a Muslim. Greg is a vegetarian. Liz is a vegetarian, but eats some kinds of fish. Calder doesn't like anything wet. And Rowan, my nephew, will eat anything. So this is the variability that arrives at the dinner table. So rather than providing one single meal that's going to meet the needs of everyone, we have to think flexibly about how we would proactively design a menu that's going to work for everybody. So we might consider something like a burrito bar where people can make their own mix and match. My slides are not advancing.
No.
Oh, that's because I'm sharing the wrong screen. Just
But it was beautiful.
It's beautiful. It's even more beautiful if you can see what I'm talking about.
I wrote down every word you said.
Okay. There's the burrito bar.
Wait.
It's funny because I'm looking at it.
There it is.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you for
Now
saving
we
me,
need
Emily.
snack.
Emily's private messaged me in the chat and saved me. We could have gone all night like that.
No, I was.
You didn't get to see my family. There's my family.
Oh
There-
my
No, I'm
goodness!
so
Oh, that's so
happy.
great! I'm so glad you went back.
Because the story was enough.
Good.
Oh, that's so cute.
Great.
My kids are not the kids who will eat anything. That's my nephew. So out of this variability is the norm. The brains are as unique as fingerprints. And so if we imagine that everybody in the world has a different fingerprint, everybody in the world, of course, has a different brain, and fingerprints don't change. Brains change over time, right? So that makes it even more complicated. One way of representing this is kind of thinking about a jagged profile that every learners are going to be good at some things and not as good at other things. They're going to have certain preferences and dislikes. And we have to find ways to factor all of that into our learning. So question to discuss. We think about proactive meal design, the burrito bar. What does that look like in a classroom? What does that look like on Google Classroom in a remote context? Anybody have thoughts or things that they want to share that they've done to kind of think about how to proactively plan for the great beautiful variety of learners that come into your classroom door every day.
Emily, you've done a lot. Why don't you say some things?
Robin.
Well, I feel like the learning design studio, the lesson design studio that we just went through was really, really informative for me. That was helpful. So I'm beginning to work on one area, which is reading fluency, trying to have different ways that students can become more independent in their reading fluency. And so design and things that they can do at school or remotely. So using Google Classroom and making a choice board, changing the content, but keeping the routines fairly stable of practicing. So Bill introduced me to Vocaroo. So a lot of them have the recording. I went through and checked a couple of kids when they were doing it today, and many kids don't use it because they don't need it. But then the ones that do have learned how to click back and forth, you know, close the tab for the Vocaroo when they need to hear it, and then they go back and they practice it. So they're learning the routines, which is really it's thrilling for me. And the work that I did on, I haven't gotten everybody's results, but the kids that I have been able to assess for the winter benchmark in AimsWeb, everybody that I've assessed so far has made growth, and some students have gone from red to green. So it's been really gratifying to really focus on that and to do that in a way that doesn't just feel like drill and kill.
So
The other thing I'm doing, which I'm really excited about, which I haven't, it's not so much of a choice as it is a choice. I mean, so we've been doing journal writing, a lot of journal writing during the remote period. And I just sent them home with a journal, you know, a paper journal. And I always put in a Google Doc that they could either do their journal entry on a Google Doc or write it on paper. And since we've been back, I taught them how to do voice typing. And that has been great because they can just say exactly what they want to say. They can express, you know, so we're tying in a lot of work outside in the forest because we're doing animals in winter. So we go outside, we look for tracks, we do all this stuff, and then they come back in, they get their Chromebook, and then they do a journal entry. And these are paragraphs, for some first graders, they're paragraphs long, which it never would be if they were just putting pen to paper. So that's been really fun. And I'm trying to find out how I can get that to read back to them. So if they're, you know, speaking and reading is not at the same level, they can at least hear what they're saying so they can start working on editing and things like that.
hey, Emily, what do you use for the voice typing?
It's in a Google Doc, it's under tools.
Yeah, it's built into Google Docs under tools.
So Bill, do you know, like I've used Read Write Google before, but we don't have that here.
Oh,
So
it doesn't? Okay.
So I don't know if you know without another extension, whether there is an
There's nothing
extension
built.
to read it back.
I don't think there's anything built into Google Docs,
Okay.
but there are extensions that you can get added. So
Yeah.
just to show this under tools, you can go to voice typing here. And you click that and it will dictate whatever you're saying
Fabulous.
and make a mess of our document. It's not perfect, but it is kind of liberating for little kids especially, but really for anybody to at least be able to get ideas down that way. And then I can go back and move things around and pick up the ideas, reorganize them.
So I think the next thing I'll teach them is how to do Google Images from the web so that they can find something that shows what they were writing about and plug in Google Images. So I'm just kind of teaching them a little bit of the tech tools that they can use for expressing their ideas.
Yeah.
I have a quick question, Emily. When you're using Vocaroo, so they're using it in recording and sending it to you?
I'm recording.
You're recording
So-
them. Okay.
So no, I'm recording me. So it's basically that's for reading fluency. So I have key phrases that have focus words from the unit that we're focusing on. So, you know, ALL words, word families or whatever, and sight words, high frequency words or high frequency word phrases.
Yeah.
And so I record it. And then if they can read it, they can just read it. If they can't read it yet, they can click the link and listen to it and then go back to
That's
Google
great.
slide and read it.
Very cool.
Emily, my colleague Neil showed me a way to embed that into a slide so they don't
Oh,
have to
that'd
go
be great.
out to Vocaroo and back. So I will show you that
Okay, good.
at some point. Yeah. All right, I'm gonna push us forward because this is kind of the big central idea of UDL. And it comes from the origins of UDL come from universal design in architecture. The originator of universal design is this young man, Ron Mace, or he was young in the 40s, contracted polio. He was in a wheelchair. Buildings were not accessible at the time. His mom carried him up and down stairs to go to class in high school. He went to college. He wanted to become an architect. And the dean of the architecture school said, you probably shouldn't even bother trying. But he insisted on going to college and becoming an architect. His mom lived with him in a trailer on the campus of North Carolina State because the dorms were not accessible. And you can imagine what that's like as a young man from 14 to 22 to live with your mom. We were talking about that at the beginning of this. And be dependent on her. And so he graduated, he became an architect, and he coined the term universal design, that that buildings would be built from the beginning to be maximally accessible to everybody. Anticipate the wide variety of people that live in the world and make buildings work for all of those people, rather than what we see often in old buildings, and especially in New England, because we have lots of old buildings, things like this, where that's a school building in Boston. It has this sign next to the front door, disabled persons entrance at the rear of the building. And then it has this scary looking ramp slapped onto the back of the building. That's retrofitting to make it work well enough, rather than kind of designing from the beginning with every participant or user in mind. This is a playground outside the Spaulding Rehab Hospital in Boston that is built with universal design concepts in mind. There's a ramp that goes up to the top of the play structure. There are level entrances onto the play structure, so you could get onto it with a wheelchair or anything else, even if you just can't step very high. And then there's this device, which is a wheelchair swing. My kids, neither of whom are in a wheelchair, jumped on this thing. This is the first thing that they jumped on. And I have another version of this picture with the girl riding her scooter down this ramp. But I figured I didn't have her permission, so I wouldn't put her in this. But the idea is that what is necessary for some is good for everybody. And out of the universal design movement in architecture came innovations in other areas of design, things like curb cuts, closed captioning, easy grip tools, all of these things. The easy grip tools were created for people with Parkinson's and people who had issues with grip. And so but they're now used by everybody. And rarely does anybody go back and say, I want that old potato peeler, the metal one that used to cut into my hand when I was trying to peel potatoes, right? Automatic doors, everybody uses them. In case you don't know, you can turn on captions in Google Slides and it will live caption what you're saying. The problem, I hope Google is working on this, is that it does not punctuate and it does not give you capitals. PowerPoint, if you use PowerPoint at all, has much better live captions on their PowerPoint Live. It will also simultaneously translate into like 70 languages, if you ever need that. So
Bill, is there any, quick question, is there any program that automatically has signing associated with it?
I don't know. I know the right people to ask, and I'll ask that question.
Just occurred to me because that's a different kind of translation to ASL.
Yeah, I'll ask the question.
Thanks.
So if we are thinking about that idea that what's necessary for some is good for all, what do people imagine that looking like in a classroom? Like if we're thinking about how do we make the materials of the classroom more flexible, the assessments, the goals, the teaching methods, the learning environment, any thoughts on what that has looked like or what that could look like?
A lot of choice.
Yeah.
Print on the page that is very different in different versions, large print, few words on pages, a lot of words on pages, graphics. I mean, the whole gamut of ways to communicate on paper, and then taped communication or oral, AURAL, right?
Mm-hmm.
Picture, all the whole buffet, shall we say.
Yeah, and even digital materials that can offer those different options, and people can choose for themselves.
Yeah.
I think that what comes to mind for me is the whole representation piece and how to value different representation and I guess how to sort of, not curate's not the right word, but just how to determine how representation is tied to understanding.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I think I don't have anything specific to add in terms of what it would look like, but what I think about is, and I think I'm going on my recent experience of the voice typing.
Yeah.
What's in their brain is so much more than they can sometimes share. And so it's the way to pair those things, to provide resources and opportunities to pair that. And, I went home on such a high on Friday afternoon because these kids did such a great job with that. And then, it just gets me thinking, how else can I do that? And it's, I don't have an answer for everything right away, which gets into that frustrating part, but
Yeah.
kind of, that's, but anyway,
Something
so
you said,
it's hard.
Yeah, something you said at the beginning felt really important, Emily. Is how you value those things,
Yeah.
and how you communicate those options. Because you could easily say, well, I want people to do it this way, but if you're struggling, you could do it this way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that sends a totally different message of here are two equally valid ways of getting your ideas out. Right.
Yes.
And you choose the one that's going to work best for you. And then, by the way, think about which one worked better. And if it didn't work, why didn't it work? And maybe you'll try something different next time. That's a deep conversation to have with a learner at any level. And if you start that conversation in first and second grade, think about the learners that are going to come into Rachel's class in 10th grade, who are going to know so much more about themselves.
Right. And then you also have to bring in the contextual piece, right? So yeah, it worked for you today.
Yeah.
That's great. What was it about today that made it work, or it didn't work for you today? What is it about today that didn't make it work? Oh, you were hungry, you were tired, blah, blah, blah. So that doesn't mean you can't use it next time. Try it again,
Sure.
or try, so it's complex. But it's wonderful. I mean, those are wonderful expert learner meta-analysis kind of conversations to have with young children. For me, the challenge is not having the time to do it in my little baby 20-minute now lessons, right, Emily?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh. So
I think that is a theme that I've heard more than anything else, is that there's no time to do that work of process, or there's not enough time to do that work of processing.
It's the most important part. It is the most important thing for children and students to engage in.
Right. In some ways, what I keep hearing from teachers is that hybrid almost makes it harder because you're more pressed for time, or you feel more pressed for time because you have a limited amount of time face-to-face with kids. So you have to make it really feel like it counts. And what feels like it counts sometimes is delivering content, even though those conversations are so important. Other thoughts?
Well, the other thing, I mean, I might as well just keep talking. The other thing that's really challenging for me, teaching as I am remotely primarily, but also with the in-person children, I'm still remote and I have these short periods. And I don't have the wherewithal to offer the kind of choices that I would offer in the classroom because I don't have the, it's like, you can draw it, you can do a comic book, you can, you know, speak it, you can listen to the YouTube. Here it is, Asher set it up for me. You know, I don't have that color. I have to do it all, but I don't have the wherewithal. First of all, I don't have the time. I don't have the physical, I don't have any control over their physical environment. They're at home or they're in their classroom. I mean, the teachers can partner with me to some extent to do some of that, but yeah, it feels like my situation, even though it's amazing how engaged the children are, it's like shocking to me in the lessons. But, you know, all the things you would normally do of having them work with a partner or working in a small group, it's all like teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, teacher to student, no, to student, turn, talk to the other student. I mean, all of that is like so much more awkward, and there's so many more barriers, even to just that kind of thing, much less, you know, options for representation, you know? So.
I don't have any magical answers for
No, there
all of
aren't
that.
any. I know there aren't. But I just keep in mind all the time, like choice, 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 and engagement, and it has to matter to them. So at least I do get to, at least we have discussions about that, about mattering to them. I can do that. I can do that.
So out of this universal design work in architecture, and really out of the disability rights movement, comes the idea that the barrier is in the environment, not the learner. And so what do we need to change about the environment to make it work for more learners? And in a teaching and learning context, that means what do we need to change about the curriculum materials, about the learning environment itself, about the assessments, about the how we're engaging with learners. And there are, of course, things there that we can change, and there are things that we can't change. And so there are always going to be those kinds of constraints. And that's more evident than ever, right, with remote learning. And so those barriers in remote learning, I kind of break into, I'm going to move that so it's not a distraction. I break those into three categories, barriers in remote learning. There's barriers that I have direct control over, and I should do whatever I can with those. There are barriers that I can advocate around, like going to the district and saying, we need an extension in Google that allows them to read text. And then there are ones, and a lot of the home barriers fit into this, where I get barriers where I have some influence. I'm not in control of what happens in the home, but I can influence that. I can support parents to set up learning environments that are going to work best for their kids. But that takes, of course, that takes a lot of time. There was a first grade teacher that we work with last year who said, I feel like my job now is supporting parents to support kids, right? And in early elementary, of course, that's a huge piece of it. But I think that sometimes that's a need, not just in early elementary.
Well, especially right now, since
Yeah,
the demands for executive functioning in the online
exactly.
environment. So
Right. Huge. So people have seen a version of this cartoon probably. Equality, everyone gets the same thing. Equity, everyone gets what they need and we give it to them. And on the right, it's supposed to be universal design. We change the environment to remove some of the barriers. And then we put those optional tools on the right there to use as learners need them or want to use them or feel like it's going to support their learning. Any thoughts or reflections on this?
I really like this, but for more than just UDL, like
Sure.
the whole conversation about fair is not always equal, and it's like it's a forever conversation.
It is a forever conversation.
This makes it very clear.
Yeah, and so this, I know at Antrim has been, for some folks, has been a grounding image. Like, all right, let's come back. We need to just get ourselves in a UDL frame of mind. Let's come back and look at this image really quick. Okay, what are the barriers and how do we anticipate what they might be? So variability is the norm. Barriers in the learning environment. Learners are all different, and they're different at different times of day, whether they've eaten lunch, had a fight with their mom, or are madly in love with a new girlfriend. That is daunting, to think that not only do I have 30 learners, but multiply that by their 10 different states that they arrive in during the day. Now I've got 3,000 learners. That's 300. I did teach math. I ought to know 30 times 10. What UDL tries to do, and what is embedded in the guidelines, is really bring all of the research together about neuroscience, about cognitive psychology, and about learning sciences, and summarize that in an actionable way to make some of that variability predictable, so that we can think about how to proactively plan for it. So that's what the guidelines are. I think of them as the organizer, right? We talk about putting more tools in my toolbox as an educator. I think of them as the organizer for my toolbox. That's my dog. They help us think about what tools to use when and why and how. So like I said, there are these three columns based on the three networks of the brain involved in any learning experience. Multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, how we're sharing and content with them in multiple ways, and multiple means of action and expression, how they're showing us what they know, and how we're giving multiple ways into them showing us what they know, showing us what they know. So I'm going to keep going, work through the design process quickly, and then we'll get into some examples. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So 3 basic steps to that design process. If you remember that definition from the beginning, that it outlined this process: setting clear and rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and designing options. So clear and rigorous goals means that you're kind of teasing apart goals so that you're assessing only one thing at a time. So students will write a 5-paragraph essay to demonstrate the phases of butterfly metamorphosis. In this goal is embedded both the content of what we want learners to know, and is embedded the way that they're going to get there, the means of them showing us what they know. So we're assessing 2 things at once. We're assessing writing, and we're assessing knowledge of butterfly metamorphosis. So really we want to disentangle those goals and decide what we really care about in that moment. Maybe down the road we care about both of those things, but in that moment we want to assess kind of one thing at a time. So we might change that to students will demonstrate an understanding of the phases of butterfly metamorphosis. We could think of lots of different ways that students could demonstrate that understanding. And we've talked about some of them already, using voice typing, audio recording, creating videos, creating graphics, lots of different ways that they could show that. But maybe it's the case that we actually care about writing, and we want to focus on writing 5-paragraph essay. Then let's set aside butterfly metamorphosis for the time being, and allow them to choose a topic so that they can really focus on developing that skill of writing a 5-paragraph essay. Then later on down the road, maybe we do want to combine those together. But if they've already developed that content around butterfly metamorphosis, they have a basis for building on that. Now, this looks very different at different age levels. So in high school, of course, there are background skills and knowledge that we're assuming that they already have. So in some cases, this means supporting that background knowledge, or giving them access to a background knowledge resource that they can go to if they need to, so that they can we're providing an option to support that that background knowledge. Any thoughts, questions about that?
I always think it's interesting, especially at like 6 through 12, how hard it is, especially 9 through 12, for teachers to separate the skill goals from the content goals. So I think it's interesting to think about. And I mean, the more that they do that, the more freedom they can give students.
I mean, I know that that's something that I have a struggle with, especially when it comes along to like competencies, and tying those in, because any assessment I give is supposed to tie into one of the competencies we've identified for English. But if we've spent the last like section of time reading, and I want to get into a writing unit, inherently I'm kind of tying in two competencies at once. So I'm kind of doing two goals at once.
Which sometimes is okay. You know.
Yeah, and sometimes I think of it as, okay, I'm going to do this thing over here with my left hand, and once I finish that up, once you feel like you have laid that foundation of background for everyone in the content that you've read, then you come back over here, but being flexible about how they demonstrate that, then you can come over here and have them do a writing piece specifically about that. And it is a very tricky thing to balance, because it's never never going to be perfect. But the idea is that if you're assessing both of those things at once, in that case, and they're not writing a good 5-paragraph essay on the butterfly metamorphosis, sometimes you don't know what you're assessing, right? You don't know where it's falling down, right? Is it because of the background knowledge that they're not able to write this, or is it because of the writing skills? And Emily, your example earlier is a great demonstration of that, right? Of the voice typing, suddenly their writing skills went up, right? But actually they had all of those thoughts and ideas, right? It was the typing or it was the handwriting that was getting in the way of them expressing that. And I think often in writing, especially, starting with a topic of their choice allows them a comfort and a space where they can really exercise the writing skill. And then that becomes a foothold for really being able to write more flexibly in different contexts about a book that you didn't particularly care about,
I'm thinking about barriers. I always think Bill knows me by now at the systems level, but we're reading Unlearning right now, just started it. And in fact, there's a really great critique of the 5-paragraph essay in there. It's like our competencies and our rubrics are outdated. And in my view, and in their view, obviously, those themselves are barriers to learning, because the teacher is wedded to them, the state is wedded to them, the school is wedded to them, and they may not be the right goals and competencies for true learning that children and teenagers need. So that's a tricky piece too. If we're having them do a 5-paragraph essay and it's not meaningful to them and it doesn't really get them what they need to be 21st century learners ready for work and life, those are huge barriers. So I feel like we have to be political activists at the same time as we're teachers and learning how to do this other work.
Yeah, and that's a great example of something that I would put in the category of barriers that you can advocate around, right? Because to Rachel's point, these are the competencies that Franklin High School has adopted.
Exactly.
At this moment, I don't have a choice around that.
No.
Yeah.
But all of that is so outmoded.
Yeah.
I mean, education takes a really long time to change.
Yeah, I think about that too. And there's a brand new documentary about innovative school practices, and I can't remember the name of it, Taking Wings or Taking Flight or something like that. And that I think that just really rethinking that unlearning has been really helpful for me too, because it really allows you to say, well, what are we really assessing? And like in the voice typing example, it's really, I want to know what they're thinking. I want to know I want to know what their thoughts are. I want to know what they know about what we just discovered. And so that it, and I personally have been stuck at times with, no, they need to be able to write it. And just to take that away and to see what they did, it can be so liberating as a teacher too.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to move us forward again. So the next step in the process is to anticipate barriers. So this is where the guidelines really come in handy, right? Because you can look at the guidelines, and I'll put a link to a version of the guidelines so you can have them in front of you. There are lots of different versions, but there is a oh, I don't have it here. I'll find it in a bit. There's a version that looks like this. And essentially, 9 different boxes, providing options for recruiting interest, everything from that on the engagement side to providing options for executive functions. So this is kind of the guiding document where we can say, so what barriers am I seeing? All right, am I seeing barriers to becoming interested in something, or barriers to executive function and navigation of my Google Classroom, or am I seeing barriers to even perceiving the content or expressing and communicating around the content? And so this is where we can kind of become strategic. We could go through all those 31 checkpoints and go, and create that perfect design. None of us have time for that. So we have to think kind of strategically and thoughtfully of, in this particular content, when I've taught it in the past, where have I seen barriers? Rachel said, you said to teach a public speaking class. That's a great example of where there may be a barrier around becoming interested. So even if people sign up for that as an elective, there's still a barrier of getting up and speaking in front of everybody. And I'm going to have a real compelling reason for wanting to get up and speak in front of everybody. Most people would have to have a compelling reason to do that. So then once we've anticipated barriers, we can move immediately into, well, how can we add, I'm sorry about the dog. How can we add options to make meeting that goal, a variety of ways to meet that goal, so that the learning experience is more flexible. And then while we're doing that, we engage in this metacognitive conversation of, when we provide those different options, which one are you using, and how's that supporting your learning? Any thoughts on that process of identifying barriers, providing options? For those who have UDL experience, what does that look like? Have you found that helpful? Have you found it frustrating?
I just want to jump in. A lot of times you find the barriers when you're looking at behaviors, right? So to watch students and to interpret their behaviors as a message to you, to look deeper, right? To figure out what the barrier to learning is in that moment for that student.
It's interesting because my colleagues at AES have been so amazed at the lack of interfering behaviors this year. And my hypothesis about that is that executive function skills are being provided in the form of distancing and masking in individual learning spaces, and everybody is doing the protocols quite consistently. I'm not there physically, but that's my perception. And so children are in a very safe, predictable environment, and that's what has without being repressed. I don't think they're repressed. I don't know, Emily may disagree with that. I mean, my first thought was, oh, they're just being repressed, but I don't think so. I think it's more that one barrier to positive behavior is lack of predictability, confusion, fear. Many children need that. And that's what happens in COVID, in-person learning, that universal design, not on purpose, but has had the unexpected consequence of reducing interfering behaviors. Do you think that's true, Emily? I don't know if she heard that.
Yeah, no, I heard it. I'm just trying to, I think that I struggle with interfering behaviors because I don't have as many learning options for kids in person. That's been a huge struggle for me, that I cannot provide a full range of engagement when especially when I'm doing direct teaching with small groups. I find other students it's difficult to engage, and the amount of planning it takes to have an in-person class, even with just a handful of kids, plus it's 2 grades, and it's not, I can go on, but which I won't, but I find it difficult because I would plan very differently if we didn't have the restrictions of having to stay in a 6-foot box all day.
So you're seeing those things, those protocols as more negative than positive in any way? Because
I think they are what they are. I'm not saying that, I'm not putting a judgment on them. They are necessary, but they limit. We can't share materials. We can't do things collaboratively. We can't partner with the same materials if we're inside. And so it's, that takes off a huge, at the beginning of I'm getting more facile with some of the technology, which has helped. But at the beginning of the year, I felt like I was teaching in handcuffs. I just could, because the 3 or 4 ideas that I would have would be like, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. I can't do that. What can I do? So anyway, that leads to behaviors because kids are not as engaged as they might.
Yeah. That I really like that way of looking at behavior, though, as there's an indication here that I need to examine what might the barriers be, right? Like, as my colleague Melissa says, all behavior is information, right? So it's just telling me something, and it's telling me something about how learning is designed and how I might think about changing that. Positive behaviors and disruptive behaviors, right, are both telling me something. So to kind of summarize this, we often use this GPS analogy, right? The GPS is an amazing device. You give it a clear goal, your destination, where you want to go, and it will give you multiple ways of getting there. Because universal design is becoming more pervasive, designed into our GPS devices are multiple ways of communicating with us. So there's a list, there's a map, it will speak to you. It will speak to you, and then when you make a wrong turn, it will help you out and tell you that it's not, that you made a wrong turn, and find another route for you. So another useful analogy for thinking about, all right, what is my clear goal, and what are all of the different pathways that I could imagine for getting to that goal? And what do I know from my own experience as a teacher in the past of what some of the barriers have been for learners? So I'm going to jump into some examples. Karen, we can keep going until 4:45. Is that true?
How are you guys doing? Are you okay? Rachel, Emily, and Robin?
Yeah, we have a check-in with our superintendent at 5. Then I have an evening program, but I'm okay to keep going.
I'm game.
I'm okay as well.
Are you okay, Rachel? You're okay? Don't feel bad if you have to leave, okay?
If you have to go, just go.
Definitely. We can't hear you, Emily.
Emily, you're muted.
You're mute. Emily,
Sorry.
you're muted.
She knows.
Don't worry about it.
Can't do it.
It's okay.
You have the slides, so you'll get the basic idea from the slides if you want to continue and pick up with it after. So what I did was kind of, all right, let's outline a lesson from beginning to end. And some of this is going to make you wistful for the days when you could do anything you wanted live and in person in the classroom. So I apologize for that. But even as students are entering the room, we can be thinking about this, right? Our goal there is to create this welcoming environment where everyone feels included, to assess where students are at, their mood, to transition into a new space and into a learning environment. I'll let you watch this video on your own time. It's an incredible video. It's one of those that will make you cry because you can't do this with students right now. But we'll be back there someday. But she offers different ways for students to greet. them in the morning. So high five, handshake, or a hug. She sits at eye level right in the doorway. She gives each one individual attention. She talks about what she's trying to accomplish in that time. And so much of it is about kind of creating this environment and promoting expectations that focus on growth mindset and optimizing their motivation. So these little green or blue or purple things I'm putting at the bottom are specific things from the guidelines. So kind of examples of the guidelines in action. And she's also creating that sense of community. Oh, it's going to try to play the video. Sorry, I'm going to skip the video. So what could that look like remotely? I have seen classrooms do a Google form where they do a check-in and a social emotional kind of check-in. Lots of people have used the mood meter here as a way to support that check-in. So the energy level is on the left, so high energy, low energy, and pleasantness is left to right, so negative to positive. I like this version of it because it kind of gives you a sense of how you could use this up through high school, right? If you're using this in a writing context, right? These are vocabulary that you could use. This could be a social emotional learning and writing using effective adjectives kind of tool. Also just integrating some of those SEL check-ins into the academic opener, right? So if they're doing a do now, just have them do how you're feeling today as part of that so that it becomes fully integrated. This is something that I feel like people have focused on a lot because of just, you have to. And the reason to do that is to support students to become more motivated, connect to the teacher, begin the day, begin the period. So bye, Emily. Great to see you. Students come in, we want them to do something right away. The reason to do this, to cue prior knowledge, to emphasize the relevance of what you're doing, to minimize threats, to sometimes just affirm their identity. Let's watch a little bit of this video, maybe the first 3 minutes.
All right, so our bell ringer working on today. You got the This I Believe out, right? We're doing the 5-minute quick write about your feelings on public speaking in general, okay? So we had done a project last quarter that they had to present for and speak publicly to a larger group, and I noticed a lot of kids were visibly anxious and afraid up there. So I thought, I have some time at the end of the year. Why not do a whole unit on public speaking? Okay, so you guys can use your notebooks. You can pull up scrap paper up here, or you can type on your phones. Remember, if we're using our phones, it is for that purpose only, okay? And what I'd like you to do is just kind of summarize maybe your initial thought in a sentence and just share it with the person next to you, okay? Go ahead.
I like public speaking. It gives me a chance to share what I think to other people.
Do you like public speaking, Emily?
Our public speaking unit, last one of the year, okay? It's going to be kind of quick, but hopefully we can get some, good practice in, good exposure. So it kind of leads me into why we're doing public speaking. All right? This is a huge barrier for a lot of people. People I know, colleagues, even adults, it's very difficult for them to public speak. So I had to think about, okay, what are my expectations and what do I want them to be able to do, and how can I capture that? And what are the different ranges of difficulty and challenge in expressing themselves? So whether or not it's to a small group or just to me by myself, or not even, if that's outside the box and not even give it to people, but put it on a video. Okay, and I see some groans. So in order to eliminate those groans and to eliminate those fears, we are going to get some goals that are geared towards us, right? Our individual needs, what we need to feel more comfortable going into this. So I have the following goals posted around the room. Think about your response to the bell ringer and comfort level with public speaking. Choose a goal that is, and I'm going to say realistic, yet challenging, something you can strive towards. And then you're going to pull one of the tabs. So if you look around the room, I have these things posted, right? The first one, By the end of this unit, I will be able to deliver a speech in front of the whole class. That's kind of like that big step, big goal. Next one. By the end of the unit, I will be able to deliver a speech in front of a partner or small group. The third one, by the end of this unit, I will be able to deliver a speech to Mr. Costa. That is over on my chair. If you want to do that, you can pull a tab. So that's basically saying you're not comfortable in front of peers, but maybe in front of me you are. Then by the end of this unit, I will be able to deliver a speech on video. If you're not comfortable delivering a speech to people, right? If we're groaning about giving a speech publicly, you know, things are changing nowadays. We have more technology. It could be possible to do a webinar, right, where you're giving a speech to people electronically. So if you want to do that one, you can come grab a tab there.
Cool.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there.
I have a fifth option. You could just do Vocaroo.
You could do Vocaroo. That's right. Yeah. Sorry, my phone is ringing.
You know, like
It's kind of cute to see him talk about webinars as if they're some exotic thing that we've never done before, right?
All right, so our vote.
So if we're doing a do now kind of thing, there are lots of ways that we could do that remotely. These are some of the tools that people have used. Have folks experimented with Pear Deck? Have you used it?
a little bit.
Yeah, it's a way to allow for polls and questions that students can respond to and integrate those into Google Slides. So they're a little cumbersome, but once you learn how to use it, or once kids learn how to use it, then it gives a way for there to be some more interaction during those times.
Bill, what's EdLight?
EdLight I learned about just the other day. I don't know if it's good or bad. I put it in there because I learned about it.
Yeah.
It is a way of easily taking picture of and sharing student work. So it's web-based, and so it integrates with Google Classroom. So students can take a picture of their work and it can be attached to an assignment. It just makes taking a picture and turning it in with an assignment, I think, a little bit more seamless. So it's from what I know about it, especially popular with math teachers who want to be able to see kind of the process and thinking that students have gone through. So that's definitely something to check out. A lot of people are using personal whiteboards and having students respond that way too. This is a process that I saw in a classroom that I thought was really powerful. They go through a weekly goal setting process and monitor their progress. This is in a 5th grade classroom. And the goals were initially kind of all over the map. Whatever they wanted to set a goal around, they could set that goal. And really the purpose was to build that skill of goal setting. And then over time, they became more and more focused kind of on the content that learners were engaged in. I think the teacher steered it that way, but I think also just naturally, students were learning how to set goals that were clear, that were measurable, and they became more goal-directed in the work that they were doing. So at the end of every week on Friday, they would gather work that showed growth in that area. So they were tracking their own progress, and then they were building up that portfolio of their work over time. So that's enhancing their capacity to monitor progress, self-assessment. It's guiding goal setting, but it's also really kind of allowing them to create an identity as a learner by optimizing individual choice and autonomy. I saw a great version of this in a remote context where learners were tracking their growth in multiplication facts. They had a multiplication chart that was on Google Draw, and they went and they crossed them off as they felt like they learned them, and used that as a way of tracking their progress and setting goals around that. The more developed, at the high school level, the more developed your competencies are and clearer they are, the more learners can really participate in that process of tracking progress. in that way. And obviously the goal, the purpose of that is to become more goal directed, identify your strengths, your challenges, and get better at setting goals. I started talking about we don't want to just share the goal of our learning, of our lesson, of our unit, but really teach the goal so that they understand kind of the larger context for why that learning goal, why we think that learning goal is important, and why they might think that learning goal is important. So sharing it in multiple formats for sure, understanding the purpose of the goal, how does it connect with what we learned yesterday and what we're going to learn tomorrow? What is a real world use for this learning? How could we imagine this playing out in the future? This is from a great snippet of a webinar, which I can share. I'll put in the resource document. Where it's an art teacher and her goal is that students create a piece of art that provokes a response. And so she really had them dive deeply into other artists who've done that as a way of kind of helping them understand what that goal really means and see real world examples of that. They wrote and recorded and shared their responses with each other. They did a lot of looking at a variety of different kinds of artwork, and not just visual art, but other kinds of artwork as well. And then they chose a topic that was important for them. So they're optimizing choice. They're really trying to make those goals as salient and right in the front as possible. And in some ways doing that by activating background knowledge. One of the things that I have heard about that is an incredible opportunity for remote learning, and this is a great remote learning and forever after now, is that we have a lot of opportunities to have visiting experts come into our classrooms, right? That wall has been shattered. Everybody knows that Zoom exists now, and there's no reason we can't be as ambitious as we want in the people that we invite into our classrooms. And if we can't get them live and in person, there are now more authors sharing their work on YouTube and those kinds of contexts as well. So I'm going to, so yes, why do we do all of that? Teaching of the goal and sharing of background knowledge so that our students are kind of more knowledgeable and can connect what they're learning to the real world and to the larger purpose of why they may be learning those things. I'm going to pause here, even though we're kind of halfway through the lesson, and we're not going to get through the whole thing, just so that we can have a bit more of a conversation to wrap things up. Any final thoughts, questions, reflections on what we've talked about? What are you taking away from this that you want to try out someday or tomorrow or wherever you're at?
I had a thought, and you can tell me, and I hope I can express it. Part of what's really important is identifying and parsing out your priority goal, and then surrounding it with as much choice and student autonomy and flexibility as you can. Like really laser focus. And part of it is like get a laser focus on what it is you want a student to be able to do.
And what does that look like? If they're successful, what is it going to look like?
What does it look like? And then everything else around it can be flexible. And I think maybe that part of what stops people from doing this is that sometimes you don't actually know the laser focus of your lesson and what it looks like.
Yeah.
Or your target and what it looks like.
Right. And so one of the things that we often talk about is that choices are only they're only meaningful as alternative paths if you're laser focused on where you want everybody to end up, right? Otherwise, you could just be offering lots of different choices. They're going to take people in lots of different directions, but it's not kind of supporting the grander picture of these are the things we want students to learn over time.
Yeah.
It is very hard to be clear, to be focused and clear about that, and because there's so many pressures for so many things that we need students to learn or want students to learn. You know, to Rachel's point earlier, it seems like, well, God, it'd be more efficient if I just combine 5 things together into this one project, and right, but it's not. We may be creating lots of barriers by doing that, right?
It really goes hand in hand with this sort of standards based or standards aligned work that I often do when I go into schools, and I have to have people really look at specific learning targets and talk about, well, what does this look like? So it really, I don't know, I feel like it marries very well.
Yeah, it does match up very well with that kind of work. Other final thoughts? Thank you all for coming. Thank you both for coming.
It's always good to
Karen
hear
was going
you,
to be here
Bill.
anyway.
It's always good to hear and be here, and we hear it is. It's always good.
Good.
Yeah.
So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Robin.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you,
Bill,
Karen.
and I'm thrilled because I was looking forward to this. So we have the document, the link to the document, and some slides. So if we want to go through the rest, we can.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Thank you much.
And that art lesson, I'm really interested in that, even though it's at a different level and it's a different topic. I'm just, because, yeah.
Have you seen that before, Robin?
I don't know if I have.
Okay.
I don't think so.
I will find the link and I'll put it in
There's
that.
no urgency.
In that document.
Urgency. Yeah. Thank you.
Because let me tell you, the context is she is reflecting on kind of the 3-year arc of learning UDL and progressively integrating it more and more into her practice. It's Lizzie Fortin.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. And so it's just very powerful to see that progression. And it also helps you realize, oh, this is not an overnight thing, right? This is not something I'm going to pick up one day and then be an expert at the next day.
You don't even have to send it. I thought it was her work probably. All right. You don't even have to send it. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been in a workshop with her and seen some of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, I'm in this whole other explode some place where I'm thinking, well, yeah, it's great to have a laser focus on the goals, but who's setting them? It's not the students. I mean, I have this, you got my email earlier this week, Bill, reading on learning. It's like, well, I mean, that's a whole other tear, but.
Robin, so yeah, you're not necessarily beholden to specific.
Oh, I have standards. School counselors have standards. They're pretty broad though, you know? And so for me, my goal when I'm in the classroom, a lot of it is relationship and self-confidence. You know, it's all these mushy soft skills, you know, but also I have big equity diversity goals of like expanding their horizons and so on. Oh yeah, I definitely have goals. But I mean, I think in the large, I'm thinking on this other level of how participatory and democratic, small d, can we get education to be? You know, I know it's not realistic, but you know, you start with something unrealistic and you move a little bit because the students need to be involved in all of this, the goal setting too. I mean, that's really hard. We don't even know what the goals are, you know what I mean? But
right.
You know, because yeah, we have a laser focus. That's Robin's laser focus of the goal that I want to teach in that lesson. But that might not be the student's goal. I can try to make it relevant and meaningful to them, but it's still, I'm the one that's defining it. It's the adults, you know.
Robin, we should create a space to have this conversation among the New Hampshire UDL teachers, because I think it's an incredibly important conversation to have. And it's one that often is not the central focus because of the priorities, right, that are set. But I think it's
you start thinking along those ways, and it's like, oh my gosh, nothing I believe is true. You know, I mean, it's like it's unlearning. You know, that's why I love that book and that concept. It's my way of thinking.
I'm gonna check that book out.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, I have to go listen to the superintendent. Good to meet
you. All right.
So I hope
Good to meet you too.
like you had time to participate, because I know I talk a lot, Yeah, so-
Honestly, I don't talk much until I have the opportunity to sort of know people a little bit.
You
And
did
then
great.
so
It worked out well then.
Great. It was really
All
nice
right.
to meet you, Rachel.
bye.
Bye, Rob.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.